I think you might have Romans 13 at your table, so let's look at that together. Let's set a couple of objectives for today. I suppose if you're a part of the underground, it would be important that you know what the underground governance is. And so walking away going, okay, I have some confidence maybe, understanding in the kind of layers of accountability and preservation of important things. That's good. That's important. If you lead some kind of ministry, I think there's another level of questioning about how are we governed? How responsible is that governance? The thought into it. How biblical is it? How timely is it? Does it fit the day in which we live? And then maybe a third level for everyone in the room. Are you someone whose life and ministry and whose calling is protected and preserved by the gift of good governance? And so there will be, I hope, a personal challenge to think about. The simplest way to put it is am I someone who's in submission somewhere to someone somehow in a way that's responsible and isn't overly vulnerable but is healthy, I suppose. So those will be our objectives. And of course, as always, please, shout out ideas, thoughts, heckle, whatever you need to do. But let's have a conversation if possible. So let's take a second. This is obviously a very, is he heckling to himself? What's going on over there? Is that Jeremy again? This is obviously a text you will be familiar with, but also probably feel an avoidance towards. It's a difficult text, an awkward text for a lot of reasons. So let's just look at it head on. I thought it would be an interesting starting point for our discussion. I'm not going to, exposit the text, but I thought it would be a good jumping off point for us to have a discussion about this, the sort of ideas that are ancillary, that circle, that are adjacent to the idea of polity and governance. So take 2 or 3, just read this short piece of Romans. Let's talk about it. So just what's your immediate reaction to this text? What's something that stands out? Actually, just to get you going, why don't you just turn to people in your table? Just 2 or 3 of you just share real quick what stood out, what challenges you. Really good. I think it's important to acknowledge the context in which the Apostle Paul is writing the book of Romans. So however oppressed you feel by a bad manager or a bad police officer interaction or a bad government decision or a bad city council or whatever, you ain't seen nothing like the Roman Empire. And while this text and a few others have been styled as law and order kind of things where we're meant to just obey the authorities as if it's some kind of a status quo, a support to the status quo, this is the Apostle Paul, who himself stood before magistrates and was wrongfully accused and eventually killed. Punished, whipped, in every case wrongfully accused. Sometimes he got out of it. Festus, there's some examples, where the system worked for him, and sometimes the system totally betrayed him, and this is a guy saying, stick with the system. At some level, he's saying that is there. God put that there. That system. Now, I do think it's important to make a distinction that what he's saying is put in place by God is authority itself, not the people in particular. So this is what the earlier point, that the thing that has been installed by God is the idea of authority, the idea of governance, which is for the service of God and your good. So authority is a thing which is like heavenly. It exists in God's mind, and it's meant to be installed in human systems. And it's there. And when it's there because God wants it to be there. Now, Human people then take those roles and can totally abuse that. And I think the important thing to see here too is that there will be an answer given for not just the way authority is responded to, but the way authority is used. Actually, this also should strike terror in those who govern, not just those who are governed. Because there is a real sense that this thing comes from God, and if you don't submit to it, you're sort of resisting God. And if you misuse it, if you abuse this idea of authority, which obviously people do, then you also will have to answer to God who installed that in the first place. And if you find yourself in any kind of leadership role that has any kind of power or has any kind of influence over other people, you ought to tremble. This is exactly why, he says, and Paul says in another place, not many of you should want to desire to be teachers. Because it's a higher level of responsibility, a higher level of expectation. So rest assured, there will be a reckoning for anybody who has taken this God-given thing called authority and misused it. And if you don't believe me, just take a little step back into chapter 12. What is chapter 12 about? I mean, chapter 12, in view of God's mercy, we ought to renew our minds. We ought to look at a world being transformed and conformed to the image of God. But honestly, we're stuck between these two worlds, right? Babylon and Zion. This is always our tension. And he says, look, if someone does evil to you, don't repay evil for evil, but overcome evil with good. Not because you're just meant to take it, but to your point, because something happens in us. This was King's point. King is saying, look, we're not going to become like the people we're critiquing. The last thing we want is to let them take our soul. So if they do evil to us, we can't repay evil for evil, because if we repay, this is the whole principle of nonviolence. If you do violence to me, I have a right to do violence back to you, but if I do violence back to you, I become like you. I become like the thing I despise. I become the thing that we know is wrong in the world. And so we have to refuse that offer. So this is the idea of nonviolent resistance. You resist, but you don't respond with the same kind, right? This is Paul's point in Romans 12. Don't repay evil for evil, but overcome evil with good. And then not that just because that's just for your character and you'll get through it, but then the next line, for it is mine to repay. I will avenge you. Revenge is mine, says the Lord. So don't worry, I'll sort those people out eventually. But you don't try to sort those people out. You don't get into the business of judging the judge. Just leave judges alone, and I'll deal with judges. And do your best not to sort of break the rules they set up, which are for the good of people. Whether those rules are perfect or not, don't worry about that. Live your life in such a way that you can be proud of it, that you can be upright, but don't resist that. The goodness of it, the authority itself. So there's something about authority which is heavenly. It's not just temporary. It's permanent. It's eternal, this idea of authority. By the way, if you're uncomfortable with submission to authority, which I'd have to say at my core I am, and if you're uncomfortable with submission to any kind of authority, it's going to be very hard to be a Christian. Because the whole proposition is submission to the Lordship of Jesus. The whole entry into the kingdom is nothing you can do. There is no work you can do, but it is simply by laying hold of this gift of God through faith, and that comes through the vehicle of surrender. You have to say, okay, not my will, but your will be done. And by the way, all of eternity will be us in submission to the government of God. So government itself is not a bad idea. It's a heaven's idea. I just have a couple of thoughts, and what I'll do is I'll try to shape what I think government is as a sort of construct. I'll share some keywords I think that are important for us in our polity, and maybe try to shape that a little bit, work that out with you, and then maybe make a small challenge to us this morning. So recently I was at an event and I met this guy called Mark Whitaker. He holds the distinction of being the highest level corporate executive to ever inform for the FBI on his company. Arthur Daniel Midland's ADM. This is in the mid-90s. There's a movie, Matt Damon did a movie called The Informant. Did anyone see that movie? That's Mark Whitaker's life. Mark Whitaker is the Matt Damon character in The Informant. So he's a shady guy. I met him. So I just recently met this guy. He's really quirky and funny, but he I guess in his early career he was a bit shady, and he got involved in this major conglomerate. And one of the things that they did was manufacture a protein reactor agent called lysine. It's something that's in almost everything we buy in the grocery store. And they were part of like a price fixing scheme. So there was only a certain number of manufacturers in the world, maybe 4 or 5 of them in the world, that were able to produce lysine, which goes into all this additives and all this foods we eat and drink. And so what they did is they would secretly, clandestinely get together and price fix. They would say, let's put the prices higher, go against regulation, put the price higher. And they made billions of dollars. And much of that was sort of being passed between them. Whitaker, he's a chemist by training. He gets sort of swept up into this, and private jets and big houses, and he gets sort of caught up in it. It's a little bit of a conscience twinge as he tells the story. Like, maybe this isn't quite right, but all the money, and and it's just the way business was done, so he got kind of swept up into it. My favorite part of the story, and the best part that he tells, is he finally, it's just getting worse and worse. He knows what they're doing is illegal. He knows what they're doing is hurting the American public. So put it this way, for every, say, $100 you spend at the grocery store, about 15, you were paying about $15 more because of them. So to just break that down into like every day constantly robbing people. That's what they were doing. So you were paying this premium for everything just because they were price fixing, and what they were doing was illegal. And it was just coming out of the pockets of every single person, every single shopper in America. So bad people, doing this sort of nasty white collar crime. He starts to feel a little bit guilty, a little strange about it. So he decides he's gonna bare his soul, open up to his wife. His wife's called Ginger. They've been dating since they were 13, childhood sweethearts. They've never known anyone else. He thinks, well, I'll share with Ginger. Ginger's a Christian. He's not. Wow. He may have had some thoughts about it, but so he finally kind of comes clean. Like this is what we're doing. This is my favorite part. So Ginger says, okay, I need to think about this. So he has now come clean with this corporate malfeasance that they're involved in. And of course, she's living in a big house and has all the cars and all this stuff too, but she's like, okay, I need to think about this. So he gives her a little time. She goes off, and as he tells the story, I think it's like the next morning she comes out and says, okay, I've come to a decision. And her decision was, I've already called the FBI and turned you in. Yes. So she thought about it, and apparently what she was thinking about was when to call the police on her husband. So she totally turns him in. The FBI show up that morning. She's like, they're going to be here in like an hour. So heads up. So he's like, okay. So he has no choice but to turn informant for the FBI. Basically, they're like, all right, here's what you can do. You can go directly to jail. Do not pass go. Go directly to jail. Or you can wear a wire. So he ends up wearing a wire for 3 years, collecting all of this stuff. He's a real kind of stumbling, clumsy fool about it. Like they would. I think they had this lamp, this sort of owl lamp or something, and the bug was in it. And they would take this lamp would just show up at meetings where they were all around the world. It'd be like in a hotel room in Hawaii, in a boardroom in Tokyo. Same owl lamp. Like none of them noticed it. And he's so bad at this that he would like go over to it and talk directly into it. Or he would refer to people by name. This is all in the movie too, which is really funny. He'd be like, there's Will Beckton who has just walked in the room. Hello, Will Beckton. Like things you would never say in normal conversation. He's a really awkward guy. He was a really awkward guy to begin. He's still a really awkward guy. Anyway, there's no choice but to turn informant for the FBI, and he does. And of course, he uncovers the largest case against corporate malfeasance. But he's such a arrogant guy. He doesn't sort out his character. So meanwhile, while he's informing for the FBI, he's also embezzling money from the company. So he he decides, well, I can see the whole company's going to go down soon, so I'm going to start embezzling money. So he starts slowly embezzling. He embezzles $9.5 million while he's informing for the FBI. So he's talking to these guys every day. He's in relationships with them. He's just kind of out there. He's not getting it. It's not coming home to him. So they, at the end, when they're about to kind of close the case, they're looking at stuff saying, Mark, have you been embezzling money? He's like, well, yeah, because I knew the company was going to go down, so I thought, let's get some money over here to the Whitakers before I'm about to lose my gravy train. And they're like, okay, so he had immunity. You understand, because he was informing, he had immunity. Well, that's now gone because he's broken new laws. So like, okay, we're definitely going to arrest you now for the embezzlement stuff. He's like, what? I thought we were friends. It gets worse. So they say, hey, what we'll do? We'll make a plea deal with you, and we'll give you 18 months for the embezzlement stuff. But you're going to have to do some time. Like, sorry, this is a different situation. You're going to have to do some time. He's like, no way, I can win. The answer is no. He couldn't win. He was 100% caught writing checks to himself for $9.5 million over about a 15-month period. So, of course, he loses in court and gets 9 years. 9 years that he gets sentenced to. Now, why do I bring it up? I bring it up because of his wife. The whole story is about Ginger. Ginger, who when she first hears of his misconduct, says, I love you, I've thought about it, I've called the FBI. And then, this is so amazing, I think he should take the deal. He says, no, I can win, loses, goes to prison. He ends up serving 8 years of that sentence. And because it's like white collar, he ended up having to move around. They move you. They don't just keep you in one prison for 8 years. So he moved around to different cities around the U.S. And every time he moved, Ginger would pick up house and move so that she could visit him every single day for 8 years. Of course, he tells the story like she saved him. And of course, in prison, he comes to faith in Jesus. A really cool guy, a really remarkable guy now. Always was sort of strange, but something about that story makes me think about what is real commitment to people. What is the value of real governance? Something that will call you out when you're wrong, hold you accountable, even when you don't want to be, but will stick with you after you've been caught. This, it occurs to me, is something that is very rare in the time in which we live. We either have these are our two cultural options. One is libertine. Do whatever you want. I don't say anything. Find your bliss. Live and let live. Be happy. I don't care. I got nothing to say. I think what you're doing is weird. It's possibly criminal. But it's not my place to say anything. I won't say anything. We just let people do whatever they want, think whatever they want. There is that. And that's really received as real friendship. A total acceptance of behavior of other people is received as real friendship. Until you do something catastrophically bad, until you really break the rules, the unwritten, quiet rules, that there are things you cannot do. And so you get canceled or you get rejected by the world at large. All those people which said, do what you want, think what you want, act the way you want, now suddenly say, I won't touch you with a 10-foot pole, you're no longer my friend, stay away from me. And so it's either libertine or it's canceled. These are our two opportunities, our two options as a culture. Can we not see that that's coming up short in both regards? And what is real friendship, real relationship? What does healthy authority even look like in our lives? Is it not to say that to catch us when our behavior is moved beyond the bounds of sort of, I don't know, moral, ethical, or civil behavior? That there's something there to catch us? in that? And if and when we do breach that, which we all will, if and when we do breach what is good, normal, moral, ethical, civil behavior, there are people that say, both on the one hand, that isn't okay, and you have to stop. But on the other hand, but I will be with you. I'll visit you in prison every day. Ginger herself is so remarkable that she got what's considered whistleblower status because she blew the whistle on her husband. And so she wasn't trying to blow the whistle on Arthur Daniels Midland, but because she blew the whistle on him, and so she got protected to some degree because she was going to go bankrupt. Obviously, her and her 3 kids, after he goes to prison. And actually, it was the Coca-Cola company that paid her a salary and helped her move house every time he moved prison, because she single-handedly saved them billions of dollars that they were being ripped off by ADM. So Coca-Cola's like, you're a hero. We love you. We're going to protect you. And so they did. But there it is. On the one hand, the whistleblowing on your own husband. And on the other hand, the loyalty to stick with him. And to see him through it. To not go anywhere. We all need this. We don't need some version of this in our life. We're probably all a little bit put off by the word government, by the idea of government. And maybe to some degree it's like a PR problem. The word has these connotations because our experience with government is so negative. I'm starting to kind of rub elbows with county commissioners and city council and county execs and those kind of things. And whenever the word government comes up, it's always negative. It's always weighted negative. Government, government equals bureaucracy, equals career politics, equals something really negative. And there it is. I mean, that's just the way we use the word. I understand that. But then what that does, that leads us intellectually, mentally, spiritually to this idea that would we be better off without it? Would we be better off without government? Without governing? Without people that govern us? And honestly, I think that is as non sequitur, that is as fallacious, as stupid as saying, I've had a bad meal, I think we should all just starve to death. All human beings would be better off if we just didn't eat and all died from this point on. The bad meal, of course, our encounters with government are mostly positive, actually. They're mostly there to help us. And this is why it's so frustrating when they don't. This is why it's so difficult when they come up short. Because there is such a thing as justice. There is such a thing as righteousness. And we have a kind of implicit expectation that when I go to the Social Security Administration or to the DMV or wherever I go, I think this ought to be done correctly. This ought to be done in a fair way. And because it most of the time is, when it isn't, it stands out. It becomes an exception. And guys, I am the last person to make some kind of argument for any form of government. I could care less. I think if you know me, you know that's the truth. But what I'm saying is most of our experience with schools, with roads, with wastewater management, most of our experience with people that govern us, that take tax money, and this is part of what Paul's saying, to take a little bit of our money, and they say our job is to try to somehow, for the public good, distribute that. Are they going to do that perfectly? No. Are they even going to do it well? No. But the effort is important. And actually, this also becomes an important construct for the church. And actually for your ministry. And actually for your family. Because what does it mean to govern? I mean, it's a Latin. The root word there is Latin. And in the Latin etymology of the word, it has to do with subordinate authority. This is really important. In other words, somebody who doesn't have the top authority, but who sort of speaks for the authority. This is why Pontius Pilate was governor of Galilee, Judea, at the time of Jesus' trial. He was not Rome, but he was sent to that region of the world to govern on behalf of Rome. He doesn't have the ultimate. He's not Caesar, but he's a governor within it. By the way, we use that. Anybody work on engines or the mechanical connotation of the word governor? Anybody know what I mean? A governor is a regulator. It's something you put on a machine that affects the flow of something, that turns it on or off, that allows it either restrict something or allows something to move on. That is to have a governor, to actually install. It's a part, a machine part. In that sense, government, governing, is simply allowing the resources, someone is in place to make sure that resources are used the way that they should be used. But they're not the ones that hold the authority. The authority has to come from somewhere else. And this is certainly true in the church. This is why governance is not a problem that is not an idea that we should have a problem with, because for us, the head of the church is Jesus Christ. So we have a belief that we have a head who's actually perfect and benevolent and should be submitted to in all matters. So all we ever do in leadership is govern. All we ever do are subordinate acts of leadership. And always it should be for the service of God and for the good of people. And when we breach that, when we violate that essential covenantal relationship with the authority that our authority is derived from, we violate something very profound. So I'm not here to sort of defend government and say you should just submit to it at all times, but we should, only because it exists as something that is for us to respond to God, to His authority being exercised in the world. But at the same time, if you were a person in authority or a person who has some kind of relationship to governance, you better be careful how you use it. I'm like back spending time in Homer's The Odyssey. Do you remember reading that in school or anything? I'm gonna lose everyone. I think well, part of the reason why I'm interested, I'm rethinking about the Odyssey is because of the idea of like archetype stories, like stories from which all our stories come. And the Odyssey is one of those stories. It's simply one of the greatest pieces of literature we have. And poor Skylar and Monica the other day, I gave them like a 45-minute lecture at dinner about the Odyssey. Was it pretty bad? Where's Skylar? It was okay. You hung in there. I'm sorry. Thank you. Okay, someone read it. Mm-hmm. Well, the Odyssey, of course, is the story of Odysseus. It's a story of a great man, a great warrior, the hero of Troy, the second greatest archer in all of Greece. You know, this great man. But actually, the first half of Odysseus' story of the Odyssey, he's absent. First half of the whole epic tale is his home without him. It begins in Ithaca, and we see Penelope, his wife, and he's now gone. He's off to war. She doesn't know if he's dead or alive. And his little son, Telemachus, who won't even remember his father, but his father's gone off to war. And if you remember the story or know the story, the problem is that Odysseus has this great estate, this great wealth, land, and so forth. And so if he's dead, then that means Penelope has to find another husband. And that husband wins this lottery of Odysseus' estate. Because Telemachus is too young to take over. He's too young to take his father's estate. So what that means is all these suitors start arriving. And the first half of the Odyssey is about this void that Odysseus leaves because he's gone. And if you remember, the suitors all come. There's dozens of them. They come. And they're just vile men who want to take Penelope. They want to take advantage of this sort of ancient custom. I think it's called xenia, where you're meant to provide hospitality to any stranger. You're supposed to provide protection and hospitality to anybody that comes to your home. But the other side of xenia, the other side of this ethic of caring for the stranger, providing hospitality for the traveler, is that you're also not supposed to take advantage of that. And this is a very ancient principle, more, that holds the ancient world together. Because you can imagine how difficult it would be to travel from one place to another. There's no hotels, there's no roads, there's bandits and so on. So you need to be able to just find a person who's living there and ask to impose upon them from hospitality and them to feel that they must give it to you. And this is a core construct of this time. It would have been in Jesus' day too, by the way. But at the same time, you cannot take advantage of it. You can't stay too long. You can't take more than your fair share. This is very important. And the suitors do that. The suitors are vile, vile creatures. In fact, in really looking at them in the cultural milieu, in the context in which you're reading the story, you realize these are as evil of people as possible, because they start taking advantage, eating all of his stores. All their servants are there. They bring in. There's like 100 people that descend on Odysseus's household and begin to just tear it from all of its resources. And of course, Penelope isn't sure if he's dead or alive. By the way, the Odyssey is a love story. It's a really incredible love story, because Penelope isn't sure if he's dead or alive, and she doesn't want any of these suitors. And so, if you remember, she says, "Well, I'll weave this garment. When it's done, I'll pick someone." And so she just keeps holding him off at bay. And every night she'll pull the threads one at a time out of the garment she was weaving. They would watch her weave, and then she would pull it out. That lasts 3 years. She just keeps trying to hold these evil men at bay. But why do I bring it up? Because what I'm realizing again as you think about it is that on the one hand you have the suitors who are actually young men whose fathers have also gone off to war, whose fathers were killed probably in the Trojan War. And then you have Telemachus, who's too young to stand up for his mother. And for 20 years, these suitors come after Penelope, and she holds them at bay. For 20 years, they strip away all the resources of Ithaca. And Telemachus, even though he grows into a man, he grows well into his 20s, he never is really able to stand up to these guys. And on the other hand, the suitors themselves are young men who are acting vile. And in both cases, you see the weakness of men without a father. It's a story, really. That early part is a story about what happens to men when they don't have a father. On the one hand, they act out. They act in immoral ways. They take what is not theirs to take. That's the suitors. But on the other hand, you have a young man who's too afraid to do anything, who lacks nerve because he's not seen, because he hasn't had a father to raise him. Where there are no fathers. A couple of groundworks ago, we talked about the idea of community as a central defining character of the church, of what it means to be the church. And I made the case that maybe a better word would be family. And if we stick with that metaphor that Christian community is really a family, then what do we mean by fatherhood? What do we mean by parentage within a family? We're talking about authority. The exercise of loving authority, of both guidance and correction, of support and affirmation, but also course correction for behavior that isn't quite right. Which of us doesn't believe that kids need parents or they're going to come out screwed up? I'm not getting any head nods on that one. Think about your own life. I don't know. This is, if you remember Hebrews 12, what father doesn't discipline the children he loves? And if you are disciplined, you should endure it as love, actually, from God. Because what does it mean to discipline? You discipline your kids who you love, and you accept the discipline from a good father, a good mother, as a sign. And there is a connection between the love of God, the discipline of God, at least in Hebrews 12. And there is, I think, also a connection between discipline, the discipline of God, and governance. What are parents doing? They're governing. And it's a strange application of the word, That's exactly what parents do. They govern the family. Why put strictures on our freedom at all? Why set human beings in authority over us at all? I know those are questions some of us feel. Because there is grace there. There's grace there. But there are also dangers. There are also dangers. If you think of the word of governor, cults have no governor restricting the power of their influence. So a cult, no governor, pure power and influence to control minds, right? But on the other hand, friendships have no governor turning on power and influence. When your friend says, I don't think you should do that, you go, okay, cool, I'm doing it anyway. Right? Like a friend has no real say. There's no teeth. I mean, what can a friend do? I guess they can be like, well, I'm not going to hang with you anymore. But we all know that when we've gone out of our minds a little bit and start doing something that isn't right, even our friends leaving us doesn't stop us from doing it. There's no power there. The regulator, the governor, is not there. So we need another story of relationship in our lives. You can think of it this way. Self-discipline, which is a fruit of the Spirit, to discipline yourself, which is a fruit of the Spirit. We need that to be holy. We need that to demonstrate the presence of God in our lives. But then there's also systemic discipline. Systemic discipline, structural discipline, organizational discipline is also a fruit of the Spirit and demonstrates the presence of God in our organizations and in our structures. And when it is not there, when it is not present, it demonstrates a void, an absence of that. It's not, nothing is not neutral. Nothing is not neutral. Yep, that's the line. It's off, but there it is. To have no governance is not a neutral stance. It is a stance towards chaos. It is a choice to be disordered and to accept whatever comes through disorder. And we just looked at James, I think, last week or the week before, where this is what comes out of disorder is evil, all kinds of evil. It's not that disorder creates evil; it's that disorder is incapable of dealing with evil when it arrives, and it is always there. I mean, this was the point made earlier. We're all broken, guys. If we're asked to lead something, govern something, distribute good, and to release resources, we're going to mess up. Sometimes because of our own evil desires, our own bad motives, and sometimes just because we're dumb or because we just aren't good at it yet. It's sins of omission and sins of commission. It's sins of actual intentional maleficence towards each other, and sometimes we're just weak and poor at it. In fact, I would argue that a lot of our problems in governance in the church is not really about the abuse of power, although those things get the headlines. That actually our bigger problem in governance in the church is our failure to exercise power. It is our organizational weakness. It's a lack of nerve. That when it actually comes time to say, hey, we're not going to let you do that. We don't do it. We don't step in. The abuse of power, of course, that is a problem, but that is always going to be headlines. But when the church doesn't step in to somebody who's a bad actor within their community, that does not get any headlines. But it should. Well, neither thing should get headlines. It should be addressed. It's just as vital to actually say, we're going to take a stand for or against something. So let me just walk through. Any questions about that so far? Any comments before I go into these terms? Agree, disagree? So far, so good? All right. A little bit about the way we do things here. And again, you can think about these terms in your own way. These are simple body polity. You have to answer some of these questions. So I'll just walk through a couple of these terms that are important for us. And whatever ecclesial structure you're a part of, you need to figure out what these mean to you. So the first word really is elder. This is a word you're probably going to see a lot of churches will use. This word, it's a kind of Greek derivative. The word where we get Presbyterian, presbytos, that just means old. Like it literally just means old, like the old ones. That's why this is a good iteration of that word, presbytos. By the way, if you start to lose your eyesight because of age, which your eyesight goes bad, that's called presbyopia, right? You start to lose your hearing because you're getting old. What's that called? Presbycusis. Same word. So Presbyterians are just old people. That's what it is. Elders. But it's elder government. It's elder government. So essentially, if you think about, there are three basic forms of church government. Three basic forms. One would be episcopal. Episcopal is like head. Episcopal or Episcopalian would be like the Catholic Church, the Anglican Church, the Episcopal Church. Essentially, somebody is like installed by God, and they wear a robe and a hat, and they're important. They're more important than you. And there's a real hierarchy. They're more important than you. They hold the power. So if someone's in trouble, so if a priest does something bad, where do you go? You go to their bishop. And that bishop has power. Full, total obedience. That priest has to be in total obedience to that bishop. If that bishop does something strange, they have to go to their archbishop, cardinal, the pope, so forth. This is very hierarchical. That is episcopal government. So if you ask, how is it governed? These people are installed by God. They belong to God. They totally adjudicate the authority of God in their communities, right? That's episcopal form of government. You could call that head. Then there's Presbyterian form of government. You could call that shoulders. This is like, if you've been in a Presbyterian church or this kind of government, they'll elect or they'll select the older ones. The sort of like, there might be 12, 15 in a church of 100 or 200, and they're set aside to govern. So it's not the pastor, it's not the priest over the local congregation, it's the elders. The elders lead the church. So if you hear the term elder-led church or session or something like that, that's essentially a Presbyterian form of government. And the last form is congregational. Congregational would be like everybody gets a vote. Quakers, good example of this. Quakers are great. Quakers like can't even have a service. No one can even plan a service. If you know what a Quaker service is, you know how Quaker services work? Here's how they work. Everybody comes in, sits down, and gets very quiet. And no one can speak until the Holy Spirit leads someone to speak. And so they wait. And sometimes they quake. And that's where it comes from. That's how you know that you're about to say something. So Quakers and Shakers, they're both categories of early Christian people. By the way, I like their second name, the Quaker second name. Anybody know what they go by? The Friends, yes. Society of Friends is what they're called, which is cool. That's very congregational. In other words, what is our church? Our church is just a society of friends. So we come together, nobody leads, we just sit and listen. And if someone feels they should say something, they can say something. And someone else says something. Quakers can wait a long time for someone to say something, you know? So that's congregational style, everybody gets a vote, you know? Just off the top of your head, what would be the advantages of these and disadvantages of these? Anybody? Yeah, okay, sure. Or there's a lot of voices, too many people talking, yeah. Or it's the same guy every week. What else? Yeah. Boom. Yep, they get stuff done. When the priest of a parish goes, I think we should have a bake sale this weekend. Guess who he has to ask? Himself, you know. God, you know, that's it. And it's like he can come and be like, God told me to have a bake sale this weekend. Very efficient. Great point. So Episcopal style leadership is lean. It moves fast, you know. What else? Advantages or disadvantages? Yeah. Yes. It's a protection against this going wrong, right? So if this guy's like doing inappropriate stuff, what can they do? Who even can deal with it? The bishop's not there. This is why there's a horrible stories of malfeasance within the Catholic Church and so on. These high church forms can really break when the people in leadership are bad. Whereas if you had elders who had power to hire or fire that person, they could just be like, yeah, we don't like him, he's creepy, let's get another one. Push him out, Anything else? Yeah, but in all cases, I think you have to deal with this term because this term is biblically occurring. So 1 Timothy, Titus gives us this idea of like elders should be installed. When Paul goes through his first missionary journey, I think he gets past, Tyre and Sidon, and then he goes, oh no, I need to go back and install elders. This is the first time we see it in the book of Acts where he comes back. 11, I forget the exact chapter. But he comes back through, he passes through Tyre and Sidon, and then he realizes, I should have installed leaders. So he comes back and he goes, I may never see you guys again, so we have to put someone in place. And they do is install elders. And really what that term means, I really don't want it to be some mystical idea. It's just really who's older, and this is how we use the word. Who's slightly older, slightly more mature, and who is kind of respected, looked up to. To the text earlier, to those who deserve respect, give respect. If honor, give honor. Who in a room? So look, this table is all youngins, right? The young guns over here, right? But somebody at that table, or a couple of people at that table, are a little older, a little more mature, and hold a little more respect. Is that true, guys? Is there anybody at the room? Is it Ezra? Do you see what I mean? So, well, the way we would use the word is that Ezra, at least at this table, would be an elder. So it's not necessarily you have to be old, because he's not old. But an elder is the one who's a little older, a little more mature. And what that does is that I think that creates, to Tomi's point earlier, it creates empowerment in every context. Because somebody carries a little more spiritual weight, a little more spiritual responsibility. And what we would want to do is call that person an elder so that they can then step into what that means biblically. To live a life of character, to know the Bible, to look out for people, to serve people, not your own interests. There's character traits. This is another thing that's important to recognize about eldership, that eldership has nothing to do with gifting. Hear me on this. It has nothing to do with gifting. So when we think about the pastor of a church or something like that, we're talking about a gifting. We're talking about a person who can preach or teach, or a person who can administrate a group of people, lead, influence, whatever. That is gifting. That has nothing to do with character. This is another mistake we've made, is that we put people in leadership over churches, and we've not asked a question of character. We've asked a question of gifting. And I'm not saying that gifting isn't important. That comes from the Spirit of God. Gifting is obviously that's that charisma. It's given to us by God for the work of service in the body and to equip the body. But the thing that when we come to governance and leadership over God's people, the primary concern is character. The primary concern is not what your gifting is. Some of you may be very charismatic. Some of you may be very quiet in engineering. That is not the issue. The issue is your character, and that is a question of eldership. Eldership is about the inside, not the outside. Who gets to be elder is the person that carries the most spiritual maturity and responsibility. And even in a group of young people, there will be somebody who's slightly more mature, slightly more eldered than the others. Make sense? The second term then we would use is because we're so collegial, because we want to have hundreds of elders, because every microchurch we want to say is a church and therefore should be led by an elder or elders, then in every single microchurch you're going to have one or two people that just sort of emerge as elders. And then what that does is that creates a huge network of elders. So now you've got loads of elders. And so you can't do this form of government in the underground, because you can't have 200 elders having an elder meeting and deciding whether or not we should buy that building. You know what I'm saying? That's never going to work, right? So what we do is we have this secondary term, governing elder. Governing elder is a rotating role. Same principles apply in the body of elders, in the college of elders. Let's say you have 100 elders. How many elders do we have, Lucas, currently? He left? Okay, good stuff. I'm going to excommunicate him from the... So from that group, tell me, do you know how many? On the spot. Okay. So you take that group, and then we ask the question, essentially, in that group, there's going to be 5, 6, 7 of them that really also, same principle, are a little older, a little more mature, and carry a little bit of honor in the room. So everybody goes, no, I really look up to that person, really look up to that person. Other people are like, just don't know them. Other people are like, jury's still out. That's fine. That's fine too. So we've created a secondary category of what we call governing elders. And governing elders aren't above elders. They serve the body, and they serve the body in matter, discipline, and adjudication. That's it. So if you, as an elder, let's say, if Ezra, as an elder, if someone said, Ezra is stealing money from our group. We don't have much money, but he keeps buying himself, boba tea off of our money, and we're wrong, and someone should do something about that. That would go to this smaller group of people to adjudicate. 2 reasons why you want that to be smaller. 1, it's almost impossible to adjudicate something with a huge group of people. You can understand that, right? Number 2, it's about discretion over that person's accusation. So I'm sure you understand this. Just because you're accused of something doesn't mean you did it. Done that? Or as is often the case, when you're accused of something, you did some of it, but not all of it. That is very common, right? There's something to be looked at there. It has to be taken seriously. And you want to have the highest level of discretion possible in that group of people. Like, God forbid you ever get in a position where you are accused of something. Whether because you did it, something, bad conduct, or because you did it. In both cases, it's a sad day. It's not a good day. It's a crappy thing to happen. And you're going to want people that you trust to be able to hear that, look into it, address it, and if necessary, create some kind of pathway for you to either be, found not guilty, essentially, absolved from it, or some kind of pathway towards repentance and restoration. And this is back to Ginger Whitaker. To have people in your life that say, we heard this, it's actually true. You need to repent, you need to take some steps back, but we're with you. We're not going anywhere. We're going to walk with you. We love you just as much now as we did before we heard this about you. This is massively important. To have a group of people that don't just say, you did that, that's really bad, you're now out of our organization, you can no longer be part of it. Please leave, and please tell people we kicked you out. So we can put on Twitter, we hate him too. You see what I mean? So in our time, this is pretty radical stuff to stick with people, even when they do something really poor. And another integrated concept then for us is this idea of ordination. How do we make elders? Where does eldership come from? And so ordination, again, it's not a hierarchical thing for us. So ordination in an Episcopal governance is all about going through their hoops. They're going to say you have to do this to become ordained. You have to follow all these things, and you have to be approved by the bishops and whatever. The way we think about ordination is more of in its root definition. To order something, and to order just simply means to put a thing where it goes. This is what we struggle at my house. To put a thing where it goes. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Like, put the thing where it goes. It doesn't go there, it goes there. That's ordering, that's ordination. So what are we doing if we ask the whole group and we look at it and we watch it from afar and we say, I think Ezra is the person that carries a lot of spiritual authority in that little community. Then what are we doing? We're not making him an elder. Do you understand what I'm saying? He already is one. What we're doing is recognizing what's already there, a condition which already exists. This is really important. We don't make people elders, we confirm eldership. We confirm eldership. So part of our whole process is really about the year-long class, which this is a sort of version of that, is just sort of watching each other and being like, is this really true? Is this really the person? Do they really have some kind of leadership? And there have been people that have tried to start microchurches and were part of microchurches, and they just didn't have any people in the microchurch. They wanted to be the leader, and that's fine. Go be a leader. But you're not an elder until people look to you. Right? And so we just say it is true or it isn't true. And that's the basic question we're just asking. Is that already there? Is it a condition that already exists? Then we'll confirm that. So that's what ordination is for us. We do have a little ceremony. You've probably seen it. But again, it's collegial. It's just us saying, does anybody disagree with this? Because this is what we've all seen. This person is the elder of this little community, or is one of the elders of this little community. We just want to acknowledge that. We want to bring honor to that. But also we want to ask them to live up to that expectation as a biblical elder for their microchurch. To give them, to carry that mantle and all that that means. Another word that's important then for us is this idea of covenant. What holds us together as a network then, a network of elders essentially, is that we make covenant with each other. What is the College of Elders? It's a group of people that have looked at our little manifesto and looked at our little covenant agreement that we have with each other and said yes, and that's it. That's it. It's really two documents. Am I right? It's really two documents. A covenant we sign with each other, which, well, start with the manifesto. It's a group of values that we all say, yes, that is our aspiration. That is our collective aspiration. Now, why is that important? Because if you have said, for example, that it's important to you to pursue biblical justice, and then you're doing something which breaks biblical justice, which works against biblical justice, then you are violating an agreement. It's not just that you're not living up to some value set of a church you're a part of. It's that you're violating an agreement with all of us. Do you understand? So what that does is that creates accountability, which is collegial accountability. It's not a matter of like, you go answer to Lucas now. You know, you better go in Lucas's office. He's going to talk to you about what you're doing. You know, I don't think he has an office. You meet at Lucas's truck. You know, he's gonna be in shorts and standing outside. That's not. I mean, you may have to talk to Lucas at his truck, but there's no authority in that. Where the authority happens is with the whole group. That essentially, if you break the manifesto, you're breaking covenant with everybody. And so essentially, what our covenant says is we all agree to the manifesto. We agree to keep Jesus central in our lives. And if we ever do something that is wrong or hurtful, we will listen to correction. We'll undergo some form of discipline. And essentially that's what the covenant is. It's just a simple agreement between us so that we don't need some big ecclesial structure to rule us. We look after each other. But the only way that's possible is with this kind of covenantal document. So it's an agreement we make with each other, and when someone violates that agreement, if you exploit someone in your microchurch, for example, if you exploit someone in your microchurch, which is part of our covenant, if you do that, you're going to be called on it. But the exploitation is not just a breach of your own ministry or that person. It's actually a violation to the whole community of elders. Because we all said we would look after each other, and we all said we would do our best to bear witness to the kingdom. And so if you violate that, you don't just have to answer one person, you have to answer to everybody. So obviously covenant is a big part of our thing, our relationship with each other. Promises we make to God in view of each other. That's it. A couple other things real quick here. You've probably seen this before, so I won't belabor it. But this kind of dual operating system, we have the microchurches, the microchurch network over here. This is a kind of organic, everybody's autonomous, you have agency. The thing you lead is led by you. It's not led by the underground. It's not owned by the underground. It's owned by you. It belongs to you. You is not the right word. It belongs to your community, whatever it is, your group of leaders. In many cases, microchurches have their own board of directors. They have their own bylaws. They can have their own fiduciary. That's all very organic, and that creates a network, a loose network of relationships governed by covenant, ordination, and eldership. That's what happens over here. Okay. ask, well, then what are Lucas and Tommy? You know, uh, you know, Apostle Lucas and Bishop Tommy. What are they? And all the staff and so on. This is the best way to think of this is two totally different operating systems. So you have an organic operating system, which is the microchurches and the network of microchurches, which is governed by you. It's governed by covenant. It's governed by the elders. That's it. It's totally over here. It doesn't deal with money. It doesn't deal with anything related to like state. It doesn't deal with contracts. Nothing. This is totally healthily separated from that, right? But over here we have a straight up organization. And so the Underground Network Inc., or whatever that exists, has a board of directors above these executive directors. That board of directors is governed by bylaws, a tax-exempt purpose, to the state of Florida and the federal government, and operates within that in a correct and legal, lawful manner. And so they're going to hire and fire but this is the key thing. This organization exists. Its tax-exempt, its stated purpose exists to serve this, not the other way around. So as a fiduciary myself, sitting on the board of directors, I'm going to ask these guys, are you executing the purpose of the organization, which is to serve these guys to make them thrive? That's it. And the day you stop doing that, you get fired, and we bring someone else in with our big salaries that we pay. We're going to bring in better people. And then their job, this is a simple organizational chart. Their job is to hire people to help them execute on that. Simple. So all the people that they hire answer to them. They can hire or fire them based on executing on our organizational purpose. They answer to the board of directors based on executing on that organizational purpose. Simple. I think everyone understands that basic approach. But the important thing is that what we've done, which is somewhat of an innovation, is to separate these two. But to create one community, one ecosystem where both operating systems are working, and we get the best out of both operating systems. So these guys can run contracts, can answer to the government, can handle money, can have bank accounts and all that for us over here. We don't have to deal with that. And these guys totally work for us. So we can come and go as we please, as long as we operate within covenant with each other. So if there's a breach of conduct or discipline, it's dealt with over here, not over here. These guys don't rule you. You don't work for them. They're not above you. Does that make sense? Microchurches are not under the underground 501c3. 501c3 exists. It's very small. In fact, the only members of the underground 501c3 are the board. That's it. Very small. So legally, it's just this tiny little thing. The only members of the underground are the board of directors. And the board of directors hire people to serve you. That's it. And create structures, platforms that serve you. That's our kind of dual operating system. So that's another term you should probably be familiar with. I've probably gone too long, so I'll wrap up. Any questions or clarifications about that? Great. Thank you for saying that. I mean, I think, I'll say it this way. Discipline in governance is only necessary, is only there when community and family break down. So healthy microchurches and healthy people will not need the discipline side of governance. But you want it to be there. It's like insurance. You want it to be there when you need it. But hopefully you won't. Hopefully you'll never have to talk to the governing elders except, as friends and in passing. Hopefully that's not an issue. But Jeremy's right. To my knowledge, we've only ever asked one microchurch leader to leave. So in hundreds of microchurches that we've incubated, God, it's got to be pushing 1,000. I don't even know what it is, but we've only ever asked one leader to leave. And probably a dozen or more have gone through some kind of really, really horrific behavior breakdown. I mean, in some cases, stuff that would just chill the spine, chill the blood. And I think Jeremy's right. Like, we've been able to walk with people through some really, really stuff that you think, man, just never talk to that person again. It'd be perfectly fine and everyone would understand if you just excommunicate that person based on their behavior. But we don't. We can walk with them through it and even see them be restored. Marriages, even to leadership, eventually, in due time, back into leadership. That there is a way forward. There is a pathway towards redemption for pretty much everybody. Now, it's my opinion, but there are behaviors that if you do them, in my opinion, you probably just never will access leadership again. You should never access spiritual leadership again. But it doesn't mean you can't serve, and it doesn't mean you can't be part of ministry. But that's pretty rare. Those certain kinds of behaviors, and we have seen. I'm going to guess. I'm going to say 12 people, something like that, who have gone through really, really rough stuff, but we stood with them and seen them come back into some kind of restored relationship with their families or with leadership itself, which I think is pretty beautiful. You know where it breaks down, though, guys? You know where it really breaks down? It breaks down, the most loss that we've seen is because when something goes wrong in a person's mind, they don't want to stick with the covenant. Essentially, where we've lost people is because they break covenant. Not because our governance fails, but because people just choose, when the moment comes, they choose to walk away from the process. One of the elements of our covenant is a process of dissent, for example, of dissent. That's another probably important word. In other words, what do you do when you don't agree with your leader? You know, when Skylar's like, Ezra's bad and he's a heretic and he's teaching this heresy and he needs to go. What does he do? You know, how do you dissent? How do you say this isn't right? You know, we've had people criticize the fact that we pay crappy salaries. They're slightly better than they used to be, but they're not high. They're not even great. Great, that's also high. They're not even market rate. I don't know what you'd say. They're slightly lower. So there are people that have said that's wrong. You know, that's exploiting people. You shouldn't do that. Which is dissent, right? So we have a policy. We have a this side has a kind of compensation policy. And then somebody says, I think your compensation policy is wrong. I think your compensation policy is not biblical. That's great. That's not great, but it's good that you should have every right to dissent. So when people feel that dissent, they need to go through this process, which we've all covenanted to do. And when we feel that, we go through that process. And the problem is, people don't do it. They quit on the process. So if they just went through the process of dissent, we can find some kind of resolution. And their dissent could either make us stronger, make us better, respond to it, or we could help them understand our point of view, or they could leave, which is also a perfectly fine outcome at the end of a process of dissent, because we just can't find agreement. But most of the time when we've lost people, it's because they just bail. The thing that they covenanted to do, they bail. So I say that to you too. There may come a time when you're on the other end of something and you're going to need us to support you, either to say you didn't do it, to back you, or to say you did do it and walk with you towards restoration. And there may be times when you are frustrated with these guys, or you're frustrated with each other and you think this isn't right, we need to change this. And it's up to you to stick with that process. The governance doesn't fail. We do. We fail it. We fail the process itself. I'll leave you with this thought. By the way, when we were first working on this stuff, like trying to figure out what kind of governance we would use and how we would use it, honestly, I think what was driving me at the time was theological commitment to some sort of principle. So I would just think, what do I think is the best, most biblical way to do governance? But I also thought it was just an exercise. I probably never thought we would really need it. And I thought it's more about having it in place. It's like insurance policy. You just have it, but you never think you're going to need it. Now, all these years later, I'm like, it may be one of the most important things we have. Maybe one of the most important things we've done. And it may be one of the best reasons to be a part of something like the Underground. It's so that something like this exists in your life. And this is a question I would ask you. as a person, as a leader, are you someone who could get caught? Is there a net that would catch you if you fall? Is there something in place that could catch you if you fall? That could protect your people if you're the wolf? If God forbid you go a little haywire and start acting in a way that's exploitive toward your own people who you now love, is there anything in place to catch you, to work with you, to love you, but to also love you by holding you to be accountable to what you have promised you wanted to do? To just hold you to what you believe is important yourself. Do you have that in your life? Do you have that on a personal level? Do you have that on an organizational level? Because if you don't, guys, you're missing something that's very important, that's instituted by God Himself and meant to be there. I'll leave you with let's go back to Odysseus. By the way, the first time we see Odysseus in the Odyssey, the first time he occurs in the story, he's weeping. He's looking at the horizon and thinking of home. This is our introduction to the great man, the great warrior. He's weeping like a child, missing home, missing Penelope, missing his son, missing his bed, I love that. It's like a different version of masculinity, in Odysseus. And of course he goes on all these incredible adventures, with the sirens and the cyclops and all these stories you would have seen probably on movies or variations. He goes on all these sort of supernatural adventures, interacting with gods and the possibility of immortality. And he's tempted, but in some cases by goddesses, by beautiful, enticing goddesses offering him immortality if he'll just come and live with them, sleep with them, and betray Penelope, which in the end all he wants is to be home. And so that even is a part of his great journey, is to just find his way home. So when he finally does, it's 20 years later. Of course, he's changed by it all. He's older. And through some supernatural stuff, he gets sort of disguised, because the concern is if he shows up, they're all just going to kill him. All these suitors who've now made their home in his home will just kill him. So he can't just announce himself. He can't just walk in and announce himself. Further, Telemachus won't recognize him. Telemachus is 27, something like that. And so he's disguised as this beggar. He's disguised as a kind of homeless man. And he begins to kind of walk around and meet people and hear people betraying him, hear servants that used to be loyal to him, now loyal to others, and realizing that everyone has turned on him. And there's two really beautiful scenes. One is when Telemachus finally realizes that it's his father and how they're reunited. And it's just this emotional, beautiful thing where he recognizes, this is my father, come home to me. And something that awakens in Telemachus at that point too. But then of course Penelope. And she still can't recognize him. Still can't believe it's him. And she confides in this man, this homeless beggar, wayward man, whatever, confides him about how much she misses and how much she wishes that Odysseus would come home. So finally, when she recognizes him, they have to come up with some sort of scheme of what to do to get these 100 fighting men in his house out. He's one, right? But he's Odysseus. So he's like, how many are there? About 100? He's like, I could do it. I think I could do it. So this is Odysseus too, right? The weeping great man. So he's like, I think I could do it. But here's what we do. So they come up with this plan. First he tells Telemachus, get all the battlements, all the armory that are hanging on the wall in the great hall. Slowly take them down. Say they're being cleaned or something. Get them out of the hall so there's no weapons at all anywhere in the hall. Then we'll lure everyone in somehow. And so they come up with this idea that finally Penelope will choose a suitor. She'll choose a husband to replace Odysseus. But it'll have to be through the demonstration of a feat of great strength. And so what she chooses is Odysseus' bow. Do you remember? So she pulls down this bow, and she said, the first man that can string Odysseus' bow will win my hand, essentially. And so here's this great man's bow, which is now hung there for 20 years. So it's stiff, right? So one at a time, all the suitors come up, these pretenders, these malevolent actors, these users, these soft-hand men. They can't do it. They can't bend his bow. Nobody can bend Odysseus' bow. And of course, at the end, this is what I think is, and this is a little dark and probably a little bloody, so forgive me. Sorry, guys, kids. But of course, at the end, Odysseus reveals himself as the vagabond in the room. When finally Penelope says, "What about this man? Can he do it?" And he rises, and it's in the stringing of the bow. Of course, Odysseus can string the bow, partly because it's his, and partly because he has the strength to string it. But also, and this is really important, because all of these pretenders loosened it for him. And the actual sin of these men becomes the form of their own judgment, the shape of their own judgment. And of course, Odysseus strings the bow and just starts taking them out. And it's a bloodbath. And even the one servant in the end who kind of stood up for him, he goes too. He has to go too. Odysseus takes them all out. But in the end, this is what I find meaningful. It's the sin of the suitors that bends and works back into shape that stiffened bow so that Odysseus can string it and execute them. Whatever we do in this life, which is a breach of good governance, whatever we do in this life to harm people instead of serve them, is the beginning of our own demise. We begin to weaken. We begin to create the thing which judges us. We become the engineers of our own downfall, guys. It's not somebody else that does it to you. We do it to ourselves. And there's a cautionary tale. Whenever we talk about governance, I think we also have to look at our own hearts and say, there is a fallen leader in all of us. And if you haven't already fallen in some way, small or great, you ought to know you're capable of it. And because you're capable of it, you walk softly and with humility, and you create strong things around you that protect you somehow. Can we pray? Lord, thank you for these leaders, many of them elders. Thank you for their commitment to you. Thank you because I know many of them, I know they do carry like a deep humility. And while some of this may seem peripheral to our lives, thank you also, Lord, for the net which exists beneath us. And God, if any of us ever need it, Lord, give us the humility and the grace to say yes to the process, to stick with each other through it. And thank you for people in this room who have sat on teams that have walked with people through sin, failure, and restoration. Thank you that is also a part of your kingdom. And help us to have the nerve, Lord, to both speak to each other when things are going wrong, but to stay with each other and not just walk away. This is, of course, what you have done and the commitment you have always made to us. To correct us as a loving father and brother, but to never walk away and to never see anything other than the object of your great love. Thank you, Lord.